I'm Sarah Reynolds, and at 27, I thought I had it all. An executive title, a Lakeview apartment in Chicago, and finally, a life on my own terms. But none of that mattered the day I sat alone in a doctor's office and was told I had less than a year to live. Unless I could afford a treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. So I did something I swore I'd never do. I called my parents for help. But their response? It broke something in me I didn't even know was still holding on. That's when I realized. Surviving the disease wouldn't be my hardest fight. Escaping the people who gambled on my death would be. Before I tell you everything, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you, hit like and subscribe. This story might be exactly what you need to hear. Let's go back to the beginning. I grew up in a typical two-story house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Boston. From the outside looking in, we were the quintessential American family, dedicated father, loving mother, and their seemingly perfect daughter. But that perfect facade, it was just that, a facade. My parents, Diana and Michael, were textbook workaholics. My mom, Diana, managed a high-end boutique downtown, meticulously curating every detail, not for the joy of it, but for the impression it would make. My dad, Michael, was a corporate shark, constantly climbing the ladder at a financial consulting firm, chasing promotions with a single-minded intensity. Their physical presence in our home was minimal. I'd see them for hurried dinners, often interrupted by calls or emails. But it was their emotional absence that truly carved out the landscape of my childhood. My mother, Diana, had an obsession with social status that felt almost pathological. Every gathering, every family trip, even the car they drove, each decision was a meticulously choreographed performance designed to impress their peers. I remember her spending hours agonizing over the perfect outfit for parent-teacher conferences. Her anxiety less about my academic performance and more about how the other mothers would perceive her. "Appearances matter more than anything, Sarah," she'd lecture, her voice sharp with conviction. "People treat you based on what they see." It became her mantra, a phrase so ingrained it might as well have been our family motto. It echoed through the empty spaces in our home, a constant reminder that my value was somehow tied to external validation. I remember one summer, they insisted we go to a specific resort in the Hamptons, not because we enjoyed the beach, but because it was where everyone who mattered went. My mother spent weeks planning our outfits, ensuring every photo we posted looked effortlessly luxurious. But behind the perfectly staged smiles, there was a hollowness. She worried constantly about who we might run into, what they might think of our swimsuits, or if our conversations were adequately witty. Even our family dinners at home felt like a performance. The food had to be just so, the table immaculately set, not for our enjoyment, but in case an impromptu guest might drop by. We rarely ate together without the threat of an important call or email pulling my father away, or my mother critiquing my posture or table manners, all for the sake of an invisible audience. It was exhausting, living life through the lens of other people's potential judgment. My father, Michael, wasn't much different. His entire identity was inextricably linked to his career. He'd proudly recount his 60-hour work weeks, like battle scars, badges of honor earned in the corporate trenches. Missing my soccer games or school plays was a common occurrence, usually dismissed with a perfunctory apology, if any. "I'm building our future, Sarah," he'd say, his gaze distant, already focused on the next big deal. The future, always the future, seemed infinitely more important than the present, than the little girl who just wanted her dad to show up. It was a constant refrain that chipped away at my sense of worth, teaching me, implicitly, that I was less important than the next promotion, the next big client. I remember one year I had worked tirelessly for months on a science fair project, something I was genuinely passionate about. My father had promised to be there for the judging, a rare commitment. I practiced my presentation dozens of times, picturing his proud smile. But on the day of the fair, a critical client meeting came up. He sent a brief text, an emoji of a worried face, nothing more. I stood there, watching other kids with their beaming parents, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. He didn't even ask how I did later that night. His world was purely transactional, and I often felt like an inconvenient variable in his meticulously calculated equation for success. I tried everything, absolutely everything, to earn their approval, to capture their fleeting attention. I chased perfect grades, participated in every extracurricular activity imaginable, even adopted their preferred values and hobbies. I became an expert at anticipating their desires, morphing myself into the daughter I believed they wanted, a reflection of their ambition, a testament to their success. I remember joining the debate club because my father once mentioned the importance of persuasive communication in business. I took advanced math classes, even though I preferred humanities, because my mother often boasted about her gift for numbers. Sometimes, briefly, it worked. I'd catch a flicker of pride in their eyes when I won the regional spelling bee, or when I got accepted into the honors program. But those moments, those rare instances of connection, were ephemeral, never enough to truly fill the persistent, aching emptiness that had taken root deep inside me. They were like tiny sips of water in a vast, parched desert, never quenching the thirst. I spent my childhood trying to be a perfect trophy for them, a testament to their supposed good parenting and successful lives, but inside, I was constantly starving for real connection. The only real warmth, the only genuine love I felt in my family, came from my grandmother, Beatrice. She was my mother's mother, but she was a world away in every sense of the word. Unlike my parents, who were constantly striving to climb the social ladder, Grandma Beatrice lived in a sprawling, elegant mansion nestled in Beacon Hill, a testament to my late grandfather's immense success in real estate development and her own shrewd investment choices after his passing. The contrast between her comfortable, established wealth and my parents' desperate, middle-class striving was stark, almost comical. My parents were perpetually trying to impress, to accumulate, to prove something. Grandma Beatrice simply was. Her home exuded a quiet dignity, filled with beautiful, well-loved objects, not expensive showpieces. She had a garden filled with heirloom roses, and a kitchen that always smelled of freshly baked bread and coffee. What made even less sense was my parents' apparent resentment of Grandma Beatrice's money. They acted as though her financial success was some kind of personal indictment, a judgment on their own life choices. They'd make snide comments about old money and lucky breaks, casually dismissing the sharp business acumen and tireless dedication that had transformed my grandfather's initial investments into a genuine fortune. I often heard them whisper about how easy Grandma Beatrice had it, completely ignoring the years of hard work and intelligent decisions that built her estate. They seemed to view her wealth as something she hadn't truly earned in their transactional, corporate world, and thus something they were somehow owed a share of. But what truly seemed to bother them, what seemed to irk them to their core, was the relationship between Grandma Beatrice and me. From my earliest memories, she treated me differently than my parents did. She saw me, truly saw me. When I spoke, she actually listened, her gaze unwavering, her attention complete. When I achieved something, anything, she celebrated, not because it reflected well on her or bolstered her social standing, but because she genuinely delighted in my happiness. "You are enough, just as you are, Sarah," she told me once, her voice soft and reassuring, after I tearfully confessed getting an A+ on a math test, still feeling the familiar pang of wanting more approval. "Your worth isn't determined by grades or achievements or what anyone else thinks of you. It's inherent." That simple sentence, so profound and so unlike anything I ever heard from my parents, became a quiet anchor in my turbulent world. She taught me to knit, patiently untangling my frustrating knots, laughing gently at my mistakes. She'd read classic novels to me for hours, stopping to discuss characters and themes, fostering my love for literature long before I ever stepped a foot in a college classroom. We'd spend afternoons in her garden, tending to the roses, and she'd tell me stories about her own childhood, stories that made her feel real and accessible, not just a distant, critical figure. She never asked about my grades first. She always asked about my feelings, my dreams, my day. This simple act of genuine interest felt revolutionary compared to the constant performance at home. I cherished the memory of my 16th birthday. My parents had essentially forgotten it amidst their frantic preparations for some critically important work function. But Grandma Beatrice, true to form, showed up unannounced at our house that morning. "Pack an overnight bag," she instructed, her eyes twinkling with a conspiratorial wink. Before I knew what was happening, she whisked me away to New York City for the weekend. Broadway shows, fancy restaurants, shopping sprees, and designer stores that I'd only ever dreamed of. It wasn't about the money she spent, though it was considerable. It was about the time. For 48 glorious hours, I was someone's priority. I was seen, I was celebrated, I was loved unconditionally. I remember sitting in a fancy restaurant feeling like a princess, and she just looked at me, a soft smile on her face, and said, "This is what joy feels like, my dear. Not achievements, not possessions, but shared moments of happiness." It was a lesson that resonated deep within me. My parents were furious when we returned. Not because they'd been worried, not because they'd missed me. No, their anger stemmed from the sheer inconvenience of it all. They'd had to explain my unexpected absence to colleagues at their function, a minor social faux pas that, to them, was a major catastrophe. They complained bitterly about the disruption, the questions they faced, how it reflected poorly on them. Their anger only solidified what I already knew, deep down. In their carefully constructed hierarchy of concerns, I ranked somewhere below professional appearances, a mere accessory to their public image. It was a painful realization, but one that freed me, in a strange way, to seek my own path. It was a turning point, making me understand that their love was conditional, dependent on how well I fit into their public narrative. Despite the emotionally barren landscape of my home life, I somehow managed to thrive academically. I graduated high school with honors, earning a coveted scholarship to Northwestern University. Moving 1,000 miles away for college was both terrifying and incredibly liberating. For the very first time, I could define myself outside the suffocating, narrow parameters of my parents' expectations. College became my haven, my sanctuary. I made real friends, people who valued me for my authentic self, for who I was, not for what I could do for them or how I reflected on them. I found a sense of belonging I had never experienced before, a community where I felt safe to be imperfect, to explore. I discovered passions that my parents would have undoubtedly deemed impractical: frivolous, art history, classic literature, volunteer work at a local animal shelter, nurturing creatures who gave unconditional love. My parents would have dismissed my love for art history as a waste of time, something that wouldn't lead to a real job. But for me, it was a world of beauty and profound human expression, a solace. Working at the animal shelter, cleaning kennels, and comforting scared animals taught me about pure, uncomplicated love and loyalty, qualities my home life often lacked. I dutifully called home every Sunday, a ritual of obligation rather than connection. The conversations grew increasingly perfunctory, a mutual acknowledgement of duty rather than a genuine exchange. They'd ask about my grades, my career prospects, never about my well-being or my happiness. After graduation, I accepted a position with a marketing firm in Chicago, eager to build a life entirely separate from the one I'd left behind. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, sitting stiffly in the audience, leaving immediately afterward to catch an early flight home. There was no lingering, no celebratory dinner, just a quick, almost awkward photo op. They sent appropriate gifts for birthdays and Christmas, and I returned to Boston for obligatory holiday visits, brief excursions into a past I was consciously trying to outgrow. Our relationship settled into a comfortable, almost numb distance, not close, but thankfully not actively painful either. It was a truce, a quiet agreement to coexist without truly connecting. It felt like living on two separate planets. By my mid-20s, I'd been promoted twice, moving into a lovely apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, a physical manifestation of the independence I had so desperately craved. I dated occasionally, but my primary focus remained on building my career and nurturing the friendships that truly sustained me. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely, profoundly happy. I had meticulously crafted a life that felt authentic, fulfilling, entirely my own. I maintained a close relationship with Grandma Beatrice, visiting her several times a year and calling weekly. She delighted in my professional successes, of course, but seemed even more pleased by stories of my personal growth, my newfound happiness, my blossoming sense of self. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Sarah," she said during our last normal conversation, her voice raspy with age but warm with love, "to build a life that brings you true joy." Her words were a comforting balm, a validation of the path I had chosen. I didn't know then, couldn't possibly know, that the very foundations of that carefully constructed life were about to crumble beneath me, threatening to expose the fragile peace I had fought so hard to build. At 27, my career was soaring. I had recently been promoted to senior marketing executive at my firm, managing major client accounts and leading a team of 5 bright, ambitious individuals. My boss had even hinted at partnership potential within a few years. My life had direction, purpose, stability. Everything I had worked so hard to achieve, everything I had meticulously built for myself. I was proud of the woman I had become, independent and self-reliant. The first signs were easy to dismiss: an unusual fatigue, a persistent weariness that I attributed to long hours at the office, the demanding pace of my new role. I'd shrug it off, telling myself I just needed more sleep or a better diet. Weight loss, which I simply credited to stress and the skipped meals that often came with busy periods. My clothes felt looser, and while I initially welcomed it as a side effect of my busy life, a subtle alarm started to sound. But then came the breathlessness. Climbing a single flight of stairs left me gasping for air, my lungs burning, my heart pounding in a way that felt entirely unnatural. Even walking a few blocks to the grocery store became an ordeal, leaving me winded and lightheaded. Even I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was profoundly wrong. The subtle whispers of concern became a deafening roar. I scheduled a doctor's appointment, fully expecting to be told I was anemic, or perhaps had a simple vitamin deficiency. I pictured a quick fix, a prescription, and then back to my thriving life. I walked into the clinic with a sense of mild inconvenience, never imagining the bombshell that awaited me. Instead, after multiple blood tests, a battery of additional diagnostic procedures, and a terrifying bone marrow biopsy, a procedure that felt like a drill boring into my hip bone, leaving me shaking and in pain, I found myself sitting alone in a sterile examination room, the air thick with unspoken dread. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Dr. Miller, his voice gentle but direct, delivered the news that would shatter my carefully constructed world, sending shockwaves through every fiber of my being. "I'm afraid you have a rare form of blood disorder," he began, his gaze softening with genuine concern, his words feeling impossibly heavy. "It's called atypical hemolytic anemia with bone marrow involvement. Your body is essentially attacking its own blood cells, and your bone marrow isn't producing replacements quickly enough to keep up." Each word was a blow, disconnecting me further from the life I knew. I remember asking practical questions, my voice strangely detached, as though we were discussing someone else's diagnosis, a distant problem unrelated to my own existence. What was the treatment? What was the prognosis? Would I be able to continue working? My mind raced, trying to grasp the implications, but it felt like trying to catch smoke. The answers were grim, each word a hammer blow. Standard treatments had limited effectiveness for my specific variant, merely slowing the progression, not stopping it. There was an experimental treatment protocol, he explained, showing promise in clinical trials, but my insurance classified it as investigational and flat-out refused coverage. They called it experimental and not medically necessary, as if a chance at life was optional. Without treatment, I had at best perhaps 6 months to a year. With standard treatment, maybe 2 years, but with a progressively declining quality of life. A slow fading away, confined to a bed, watching the world from a window. The experimental treatment, costly and unproven by insurance standards, offered the only real hope for remission, for a chance at a genuine cure, a real future. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, already mentally cataloging my savings and assets, the years of diligent work and frugal living. I had always been good with money, responsible, building a nest egg for my future. But nothing could have prepared me for this. "The full treatment course runs about $300,000, Dr. Miller replied, his expression confirming what I already knew. It was far, far beyond what I could afford on my own. My carefully built financial independence, my sense of security, felt utterly inadequate in the face of such a sum. It was a sum that dwarfed my entire existence, a price tag on my very breath. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years, something that went against every fiber of my independent spirit. I called my parents for help. Not just financial help, though I desperately needed that too, a lifeline in a storm, but for emotional support. I needed family. I needed them to show up, just this once. I swallowed my pride, pushed down years of resentment, and dialed their number, my hand shaking. My mother, Diana, answered, her voice tinged with annoyance at the interruption, the familiar irritation of someone whose carefully ordered world has been disturbed. When I explained the situation, her tone shifted, morphing into something resembling concern. But it remained distant, clinical, as though I were describing a problematic work situation rather than a life-threatening illness unfolding in real time. "Oh, that sounds serious," she said, her words lacking genuine warmth, her inflection flat, like she was reading from a script. "Have you gotten a second opinion? These doctors are always so dramatic." I assured her the diagnosis was certain, explaining the rigorous tests and multiple confirmations, then hating myself for having to ask, for having to lay bare my vulnerability, but seeing no other alternative. I explained about the experimental treatment and the impossible insurance situation. "That's a lot of money," my father, Michael, interjected, apparently now on the line, his voice devoid of any real empathy, merely a statement of financial fact, as if we were discussing a car repair. "What about your savings, your 401k? I explained that I could liquidate everything I had, every single asset, every penny I'd painstakingly saved, and still cover less than a third of the cost. I wouldn't ask if there were any other option, I said, fighting desperately to keep my voice steady, to prevent the tremor of fear from betraying me. This treatment is my only real chance. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with their unspoken refusal. "We'll need to discuss this," my father replied, his tone definitive, a clear dismissal, a door slamming shut. "Let us think about what we can do." That conversation was followed by weeks of increasingly frustrating interactions, a slow, agonizing drip of non-committal answers and vague promises. Every call was a fresh wound. My parents would vaguely promise to look into things, but never provided definitive answers. They questioned whether the experimental treatment was really necessary, suggested alternative therapies they'd vaguely read about online, or asked if I could somehow get into the clinical trial for free, as if a deadly illness was a coupon one could simply clip. Meanwhile, my condition deteriorated rapidly, an unwelcome, undeniable physical manifestation of their emotional abandonment. My energy levels plummeted, and the breathlessness became constant. I began standard treatments, which left me nauseated and utterly exhausted, but did little to halt the relentless progression of the disease. I took medical leave from work, first draining my accumulated sick days, then starting short-term disability. My thriving career, my carefully built independence, was dissolving before my eyes, piece by agonizing piece. 3 months after my diagnosis, with my body wasting away and my spirit faltering, I made one final desperate call to my parents. By then, I had sold my car and was preparing to break the lease on my beautiful apartment, moving somewhere cheaper, smaller, just to survive. I was skeletal, constantly cold, and every movement was a monumental effort. My voice was weak, barely a whisper. "We've thought about it carefully," my mother said, her voice artificially sympathetic, like she was reading from a script, detached and devoid of true feeling. "We just can't help with this treatment. We're approaching retirement age, Sarah, and we can't risk our security for a treatment that might not even work. It's too big a gamble." The casual cruelty of her words left me speechless, my breath catching in my throat. They were choosing their comfortable retirement, their financial security, their carefully curated future, over my life, my actual, physical life. They chose a number in a bank account over their only daughter's existence. "I understand," I finally managed to whisper, though I didn't understand at all. How could I? How could parents, any parents, make such a choice? "Thanks for considering it." That was the last real conversation we had. After that, my calls went straight to voicemail. My texts received brief, non-committal responses, if they received any at all. Then they sent a check for $5,000, a sum that might have seemed generous to an outsider, a kind gesture from loving parents. But to me, knowing both my desperate need and their considerable means, it was insultingly inadequate. It felt less like help and more like paying off their guilt, a paltry sum to absolve themselves of any responsibility. It was a final, devastating confirmation of their priorities. I looked at that check, a slip of paper, and saw not money, but a complete, utter dismissal of my worth. I moved to a tiny studio apartment, a cramped space I could barely afford even with a reduced rent. It was a bleak, anonymous box compared to the sunny apartment I'd loved. I systematically sold off everything I owned that held any value: my designer clothes, my jewelry, my electronics, anything that might generate a few precious dollars for medical bills. Each item I sold was a little piece of my former life, my independence, that chipped away, leaving me feeling more vulnerable and exposed. I continued the standard treatments, the ones that ravaged my body with side effects while doing little to stop the insidious march of the disease, all the while researching alternative options and support programs, a desperate attempt to find a path that didn't involve dying alone. Through it all, one friend remained steadfast, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Jessica, whom I'd met in college, became my rock. She drove me to appointments, patiently helped me research medical options, and spent nights on my uncomfortable futon when I was too weak to be alone. She'd bring me soup she made from scratch, or simply sit by my side, reading quietly when I couldn't focus. She offered to contact my parents, to plead my case, to shake them awake, but I refused. Their abandonment was a wound too raw, too deep to probe, and I couldn't bear the thought of her witnessing their indifference. I considered reaching out to Grandma Beatrice, but hesitated. She was in her 80s and had recently experienced health problems of her own. The last thing I wanted was to burden her with my troubles, especially knowing how powerless she would feel, how much it would break her heart. Our weekly calls continued, but I carefully concealed my illness, summoning energy I didn't have, feigning normalcy in my voice, in my words, trying to sound as bright and cheerful as possible, even as my body screamed in protest. Alone, except for Jessica, I faced mortality at 27. I experienced a darkness unlike anything I'd ever known before, a profound, chilling despair. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my tiny, unfamiliar room, wondering if fighting was even worth it, if perhaps I should simply accept the inevitable and spend my remaining time in something other than this miserable limbo of sickness and despair. The silence of the night magnified my fears, the feeling of being utterly forgotten. But each morning, somehow, I found the will to continue the battle for one more day, one more agonizing push against the tide. It was a flicker of stubborn defiance, a refusal to give in. The physical reality of fighting a deadly illness alone is something you can't truly understand until you've lived it. On good days, I could manage basic self-care, showering, perhaps making a simple meal like toast, and maybe a short, slow walk around the block, a painful imitation of life. Even that walk would leave me breathless and trembling. On bad days, simply getting to the bathroom felt like climbing Mount Everest, each step a monumental effort, my muscles screaming, my vision blurring, my meager savings disappeared with terrifying speed. Even with insurance covering part of the standard treatments, the copays and out-of-pocket expenses were staggering, a relentless drain on my dwindling resources. I applied for assistance programs, spent countless hours on the phone arguing with insurance representatives, navigating endless automated menus and indifferent voices, and researched every possible avenue for financial help, desperate for any shred of hope. Jessica was my guardian angel during this time. She would come over after her workday, often bringing groceries or prepared meals, ensuring I ate even when my appetite was gone, gently coaxing me to take a few bites. She organized my medications, carefully labeling bottles and reminding me when to take them, as my mind felt too foggy to track. She cleaned my tiny apartment, scrubbing the floors and doing my laundry, lifting the weight of mundane tasks I simply couldn't manage. And sometimes, she would just sit with me while I slept, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness, her quiet presence a profound comfort. "You would do the same for me," she insisted, whenever I tried to express my gratitude, her hand squeezing mine in a gesture of unwavering loyalty. "That's what friendship means, Em. We're in this together." She was the family I had chosen, and she chose me back. I devoted every ounce of my remaining energy to researching alternative treatment options, a desperate quest for a loophole, a hidden door to survival. I joined online support groups for patients with rare blood disorders, combing through posts for any mention of clinical trials or experimental protocols. Spending hours staring at a screen, my head aching, I contacted research hospitals across the country, detailing my case, attaching every medical record, begging for consideration, for a chance. The breakthrough came after 4 agonizing months of searching, when hope was starting to feel like a cruel mirage, a cruel joke. A leading research hospital in Minnesota was beginning a new phase of clinical trials for a treatment similar to the one my doctor had originally recommended. Through a combination of Jessica's relentless persistence, she called them daily, advocating for me, my meticulously detailed medical records, and perhaps just sheer desperation in my application, I was selected for evaluation. It felt like a miracle, a tiny crack of light in the overwhelming darkness. The process was grueling. Jessica took precious vacation days to accompany me to Minnesota, where I underwent days of intensive testing and evaluation, a blur of needles, scans, and anxious waiting. When Dr. Chen, the lead researcher, finally called me into his office, I braced myself for yet another disappointment, another polite rejection, my heart pounding with a familiar dread. Instead, he offered hope. "Your case is exactly the type we're looking to include in this trial, Miss Reynolds," Dr. Chen explained, his voice calm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the sterile environment. "The disease progression is advanced enough to provide meaningful data, but not so advanced that treatment would be futile." I nearly collapsed with relief, a wave of exhaustion and gratitude washing over me. Tears pricked my eyes. The trial wouldn't cover all my expenses. I'd still need to pay for travel, accommodation during treatment periods, and certain supplementary medications, but the experimental treatment itself would be provided at no cost. It was a lifeline, a real chance, a chance to live. The treatment protocol was brutal, twice monthly infusions that left me violently ill for days afterward, my body racked with nausea and pain, unable to keep anything down. Weekly blood draws and bone marrow biopsies that felt like being stabbed with ice picks. Each procedure a fresh agony, leaving me bruised and aching. Medications with side effects almost as debilitating as the disease itself. Constant fatigue, hair loss, rashes. But for the first time since my diagnosis, there was hope. A fragile, precious hope that I clung to with everything I had. A tiny flame in the darkness that I refused to let go out. 3 months into the treatment, my blood work showed the first unmistakable signs of improvement. Small changes, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but in the right direction. My white blood cell count was slowly creeping up, my anemia lessening. Dr. Chen cautioned against too much optimism. Remissions could be temporary, and my type of disorder was known for its unpredictability. But I clung to those improved numbers like a drowning person to a life raft. A desperate prayer in a sea of uncertainty. It was during this period of cautious, fragile hope that I received the call about Grandma Beatrice. Her housekeeper, Elena, called to tell me Beatrice had been hospitalized after a serious fall. "She's asking for you, Sarah," Elena said, her voice heavy with worry, thick with unshed tears. "The doctors say it doesn't look good." I was midway through a treatment cycle, my immune system dangerously compromised. My body still weak from the recent infusions. Dr. Chen strongly advised against travel. "You could catch an infection that your body can't fight," he warned, his tone grave. "It could undo all our progress, all this work." But this was Grandma Beatrice, the one person who had always been there for me, unconditionally. The thought of her alone, needing me, was unbearable. I couldn't fail her now. Against every piece of medical advice, against the desperate pleas of Jessica, who tried to reason with me, I boarded a plane to Boston, wearing a heavy-duty mask, obsessively sanitizing every surface I touched, a ghost of my former self, fueled by love and a desperate urgency. I arrived too late. Grandma Beatrice had passed away just hours before my plane landed. The news hit me like a physical blow, stripping away the last shreds of my composure. Elena met me at the hospital, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her shoulders slumped with grief. "She waited as long as she could, Sarah," she said, embracing me carefully, her voice cracking. "She kept saying she needed to tell you something important." The grief was overwhelming, compounded by the crushing knowledge that I'd never know what final message she had wanted to share, what last wisdom she had wanted to impart. The silence where her voice should have been was deafening. As Elena drove me to Grandma's house, she mentioned something that intensified my pain, reopening wounds I'd thought were beginning to heal. "Your parents were here earlier today," she said, her voice quiet, almost an afterthought. They arrived about an hour before she passed. They had been there, in the same hospital, in the same building, and hadn't bothered to contact me, hadn't even sent a text, knowing I would be traveling thousands of miles to see my dying grandmother. The betrayal cut deep, a fresh stab of agony. It wasn't just their abandonment. It was their continued indifference, their complete lack of basic human decency. The funeral was held 3 days later, a formal, somber affair that felt nothing like the warm, vibrant woman we were supposedly memorializing. It was cold, detached, full of polite condolences that felt hollow. I sat in the front row, physically separated from my parents by only a few feet, but the emotional distance between us spanned galaxies, an unbridgeable chasm. They offered perfunctory greetings and condolences, their words hollow, as though I were a distant acquaintance rather than their daughter, a mere obligation. My mother, Diana, looked annoyed when she noticed my thinness, my pale complexion, the scarf covering my hair loss from the chemo. "You're not taking care of yourself, Sarah," she whispered, her voice laced with thinly veiled irritation during the service, as though my appearance was a minor inconvenience rather than a visible symptom of my fight for survival. She was more concerned with how my sickly appearance reflected on her than with my actual health. After the service, as we stood by Grandma Beatrice's grave, the cold earth pressing down on the coffin, I made a silent, solemn promise. I would survive, not just for myself, but to honor the unconditional love she had given me. I would build a life worthy of her belief in me, and I would never again allow myself to be diminished, to be broken, by those who should have loved me most. A cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. 2 months after the funeral, as I was preparing for another grueling treatment session in Minnesota, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the line introduced himself as Thomas Reed, Grandma Beatrice's attorney. "I've been trying to reach you, Miss Reynolds," he said formally, his voice crisp and professional. "There are matters regarding your grandmother's estate that require your immediate attention." I explained my health situation and travel limitations, my voice weary, still battling the lingering effects of the illness. He offered to come to me, suggesting an urgency that puzzled me, a hint of something significant. We arranged to meet the following week during a brief break in my treatment schedule, in my cramped studio apartment. Mr. Reed arrived at my modest studio apartment carrying an expensive leather briefcase and an expression of polite surprise he couldn't quite conceal as he took in my cramped living conditions. His gaze flickered around the sparse room, taking in the futon, the single worn armchair, the tiny kitchenette. He settled at my small dining table, its surface barely big enough for two, opened his briefcase, and began to speak, his voice calm and deliberate. "I'll be direct, Miss Reynolds. Your grandmother has left her entire estate to you." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard, my mind struggling to process the words. It felt like a cruel joke, or perhaps a hallucination brought on by my medications. "I'm sorry, what?" I stammered, my voice barely audible. "The entirety of Beatrice Reynolds' estate," he repeated, his voice even, unchanging. "The Beacon Hill property, her extensive investment portfolio, all liquid assets and personal possessions, has been bequeathed solely to you, Sarah Reynolds." The room seemed to tilt around me, the sparse furniture blurring into an incomprehensible mosaic. The world felt suddenly, impossibly off-kilter. "But that's not possible," I stammered again, my voice catching in my throat. "What about my parents?" Mr. Reed's expression remained professionally neutral, unreadable, though I thought I detected a subtle tightening around his mouth. "Your parents are mentioned in the will, Miss Reynolds, but only to explicitly state that they are to receive nothing. Your grandmother was quite specific about her wishes." He slid a sealed envelope across the table, its cream-colored paper feeling weighty in my trembling hands. "She left this letter for you. She asked that you read it privately." The remainder of our meeting passed in a blur of legal jargon and staggering figures as he outlined the full extent of my inheritance. The Beacon Hill mansion, valued at nearly $8 million. Investment portfolios worth approximately $12 million. Liquid assets of around $3 million. Various personal possessions, including exquisite jewelry, priceless art, and antique furniture, appraised at over $1 million. The numbers swam before my eyes, incomprehensible in their magnitude. I had, in the space of an hour, become a multi-millionaire, my world irrevocably altered. It was a sum so vast, it felt unreal, disconnected from the harsh reality of my previous weeks, spent selling my belongings for medical bills. After Mr. Reed left, promising to handle all necessary paperwork with utmost discretion, I sat on my bed with Grandma Beatrice's letter, my hands trembling as I broke the seal. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, I've left this world, but I hope not before having the chance to tell you how deeply I love you. You have been the joy of my life, the daughter of my heart, if not my body. My vision blurred with tears as I continued, reading through the haze. I've watched you grow into an extraordinary woman despite circumstances that might have broken someone with less character. I've seen how your parents' emotional neglect has shaped you, your desperate need for approval, your fear of abandonment, your tendency to make yourself smaller to accommodate others. And yet your essential goodness and strength have prevailed. Every word was a balm, a tender touch to my raw, aching soul. She saw me. She understood. I'm not leaving you my estate as a reward or a consolation prize, the letter continued, as if anticipating my thoughts. I'm leaving it to you because I know you will use it wisely, in ways that would make me proud. Your parents have demonstrated throughout their lives that they value money above relationships, appearances above substance. They would not honor my legacy as you will. Use this inheritance to build the life you truly want, not the one others expect of you. Be brave enough to prioritize your own happiness, and remember that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from those who cannot love you as you deserve to be loved. With all my heart, Grandma Beatrice. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, mingling with the ink, blurring the beautiful script. Even in death, she had found a way to care for me, to see me, to protect me from the very people who should have been my strongest advocates. She had built a fortress of love and foresight around me. That same week, amidst the emotional turmoil, I received fantastic news from Dr. Chen. My latest test results showed significant improvement. The experimental treatment was working, better than anticipated. My blood counts were stabilizing, my energy slowly returning. While I wasn't cured, the disease was in retreat, and my prognosis had shifted from terminal to cautiously optimistic. A future, once a terrifying blank space, now stretched out before me, filled with fragile possibilities. A second chance at life, handed to me by the only person who had ever truly loved me. As my health slowly but steadily improved, I began making plans, tentative at first, then gaining momentum. The first step was visiting the Beacon Hill mansion, now my home, according to the paperwork Mr. Reed had processed with remarkable efficiency. Jessica, my ever-present support, accompanied me. Both of us marveled at the elegant 3-story brownstone with its classic architecture and prime location, sitting majestically amidst other historic homes. Walking through those opulent rooms was an intensely emotional experience. Every corner held memories. Afternoon teas in the sunroom, bathed in golden light. Lengthy conversations in the library where Grandma Beatrice would share stories of her youth, surrounded by towering bookshelves. Holidays celebrated in the formal dining room, filled with laughter and warmth that my own home had always lacked. I could feel Grandma Beatrice's presence everywhere, not as a ghost, but as a lingering warmth, a quiet, reassuring comfort, a testament to a life well lived and a love freely given. In her personal study, a room filled with books and a rich, woody scent, I discovered dozens of leather-bound journals, dating back decades. They were tucked away in a hidden compartment in her desk. Reading them provided chilling insights into family dynamics I had never fully understood. The hidden currents beneath the surface of our lives. The long game my parents had been playing. I learned that my parents, Diana and Michael, had approached Grandma Beatrice for money numerous times over the years, for dubious business ventures, for risky property investments, for lifestyle enhancements to maintain their image, and they had been consistently refused. Diana and Michael see money as an end rather than a means, she wrote in one entry, her elegant script a stark contrast to the harsh truth. They believe wealth will fill the emptiness inside them. They don't understand that the emptiness comes precisely from that belief. Another entry, dated shortly after my 16th birthday, read, "Took Sarah to New York for her birthday. Diana was furious. Accused me of trying to buy her daughter's affection, as though affection is something to be purchased rather than freely given. I worry about the values they're instilling in that child." The journals laid bare a history of calculated manipulation and my grandmother's unwavering refusal to enable it. Her quiet strength in the face of their relentless demands. She saw them for who they truly were and protected me from their avarice. As I continued my treatments in Minnesota, flying back and forth to Boston, I gradually settled into my new reality. The financial security eliminated countless stresses, allowing me to focus entirely on healing, on reclaiming my life, on the future. I hired a part-time housekeeper for the mansion, a kind woman named Elena, who had known Grandma Beatrice for years and retained Mr. Reed to manage the more complex aspects of the estate, trusting his expertise implicitly. My improved health and newfound financial situation didn't go unnoticed. A local business magazine, ever hungry for a story, ran a feature on Beatrice Reynolds' legacy and her reclusive heiress granddaughter. I declined to be interviewed, wanting to maintain some semblance of privacy, but the article included enough public information to make clear the magnitude of my inheritance. It was public knowledge now. 3 days after the article was published, a massive, elaborate bouquet of flowers arrived at the mansion. It was a ludicrously expensive arrangement of lilies and roses, artfully arranged. The card read simply, "Thinking of you during this difficult time. Love, Mom and Dad." It was the first direct contact from my parents in over a year, since before my diagnosis, since before they had chosen their comfort over my survival. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I placed the expensive flowers on the compost pile, their vibrant colors feeling like a mockery of genuine affection, and threw the card in the trash, watching it disappear into the bin. But I knew with a chilling certainty that it was only a matter of time before they would make their next move. The bait was set. 3 months into my recovery, I was feeling almost normal again. A fragile return to wellness. My hair had begun to grow back, a soft, downy growth, a tangible sign of healing. I'd regained most of the weight I'd lost, filling out the hollows in my cheeks. And while I still tired easily, a lingering reminder of the battle I'd fought, I could enjoy simple activities without exhaustion, like walking along the Charles River, feeling the sun on my face. Dr. Chen was cautiously optimistic about my long-term prospects, though I would need maintenance treatments for the foreseeable future, a periodic tether to the medical world. I was on the mend, strong enough for what was coming. Jessica had come for the weekend, and we were enjoying a lazy Sunday brunch in the mansion's sunroom, the morning light streaming through the large windows, casting warm patterns on the floor. We were laughing about something trivial, feeling a sense of peace, when the doorbell rang. Elena, the housekeeper, answered it, and appeared in the doorway moments later with an uncomfortable, almost apologetic expression, her brow furrowed. "Ms. Reynolds, your parents are here," she announced, her voice hesitant. "With a young man they say is your brother." Jessica and I exchanged bewildered glances, a silent question passing between us, a shared look of confusion. "I don't have a brother, Elena," I said, my appetite vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold knot of apprehension in my stomach. The warmth of the sunroom suddenly felt chilling. "Should I send them away?" Elena asked, clearly sensing my distress, her hand already hovering near the door. The thought was tempting. How simple it would be to refuse them entry, to maintain the peaceful existence I'd been so painstakingly building, to keep the toxic past firmly shut out, but curiosity mingled with a strange, detached fascination. How would they justify their abandonment? What elaborate story would they concoct to explain their sudden, opportune reappearance, now that I was an heiress? No, I decided. My voice firm despite the tremor in my hands, a new resolve hardening my expression. "Show them in. Jessica, would you mind staying?" "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," she replied, squeezing my hand supportively, her eyes resolute, a fierce loyalty shining in them. Her presence grounded me. My parents entered the sunroom, their faces plastered with forced smiles, carefully constructed masks of pleasantness, followed by a young man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. My mother, Diana, had clearly had work done, her face smoother than I remembered, stretched taut, almost unnatural, her hair expertly colored to hide any hint of gray. My father, Michael, looked essentially the same, perhaps a bit heavier, his tie perfectly knotted, his demeanor radiating a false sense of ease, a performative confidence. The young man, however, hung back awkwardly, his discomfort palpable, his gaze flickering between us, a nervous energy about him. "Sarah, darling," my mother approached with arms outstretched, a grotesque parody of maternal affection, as though we'd parted on the best of terms just yesterday, as if the last year of my dying alone had never happened. "You look wonderful. We've been so worried." Her voice was cloying, sickly sweet. I remained seated, making no move to embrace her, my arms crossed protectively over my chest, a physical barrier. "Have you?" I said. My voice flat, devoid of emotion, a quiet challenge. "That's interesting since you haven't contacted me in over a year. Not even a text when I was unwell. Her smile faltered slightly, a momentary crack in the polished facade. Her eyes darted away, searching for an escape. Well, we thought you needed space after everything. She trailed off, scrambling for an excuse, an explanation that wouldn't quite form. But we're here now, and we have amazing news. She gestured expansively to the young man, who shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor. This is Liam, your brother. I looked at the stranger, this young man who was supposedly my sibling. He had dark hair and was of average height, with no particularly striking resemblance to either of my parents or to me. His eyes were wide, a mixture of apprehension and something else I couldn't quite decipher. A flicker of guilt, perhaps? I don't have a brother, I stated flatly, my voice a quiet challenge, cutting through her manufactured cheer. My father, Michael, stepped forward, his expression carefully rehearsed, his voice smooth and practiced. That's what we wanted to tell you. Before you were born, we made a difficult decision. Liam was given up for adoption. We were young, struggling financially. It wasn't the right time. We've recently reconnected through an ancestry website, my mother added smoothly, interjecting with her perfected narrative, a touch of false wonder in her tone. It's been such a blessing, finding him after all these years. We wanted you to meet your brother right away. The story was perfectly constructed to seem plausible, while being nearly impossible to verify. A secret adoption, a recent reunion through cutting-edge technology. How convenient, how perfectly timed, that this long-lost brother should appear just as I inherited a multi-million-dollar fortune, a fortune they had always coveted. I see, I said neutrally, my voice betraying nothing, my poker face firmly in place. Hello, Liam. He nodded awkwardly, his gaze still avoiding mine, fixed somewhere over my shoulder. Hi, this is weird for me too. Something in his discomfort, in the genuine tremor of his voice, seemed authentic, and I found myself wondering what lies my parents had told him, what promises they had made to secure his participation in their charade. He seemed caught in their web, just like I had been once. We endured an excruciating dinner. My parents filled the silence with endless stories of their recent activities, superficial anecdotes about their golf club, their latest vacation, their new car. They interspersed these with careful inquiries about my health that never, not once, acknowledged their abandonment during my illness, never expressed true regret. It was as if my near-death experience was a minor inconvenience, easily brushed aside. And there were frequent, almost desperate references to family bonds and blood connections, words that rang hollow in the elegant dining room, echoing their hypocrisy. Jessica remained steadfastly beside me, her presence a silent, unwavering support, a steady hand under the table, a quiet reminder that I wasn't truly alone. I could feel her silent fury on my behalf. As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate soufflé that I couldn't bring myself to touch, its richness suddenly nauseating, my mother casually dropped what I suspected was the real purpose of their visit. This house is so large for just one person, Sarah, she observed, gesturing around the dining room with a sweeping motion, her eyes gleaming with avarice, already mentally redecorating. We've been thinking, wouldn't it just make perfect sense for us all to live here together, as a family? Your father could retire early. I could help manage the household. And you and Liam, she added, turning a saccharine smile on my supposed brother, who flinched slightly under her gaze. You two could have time to develop a real sibling relationship. I caught the quick, almost imperceptible exchange of glances between my parents, the slight nod from my father, encouraging my mother to continue. We could take care of you while you recover, she added, a calculated display of concern, her voice dripping with false care. Families should stick together during difficult times. The irony was so thick, so heavy, I could barely breathe. Families should stick together during difficult times. Where had that sentiment been when I was selling my possessions, piece by agonizing piece, just to pay for medications, starving and alone? Where was it when I was facing death alone, contemplating whether the fight was even worth it, when I was lying on a futon, too weak to shower? Their words were a slap in the face, a monstrous insult. I'll consider it, I lied, unable to summon the energy for an immediate confrontation, needing time to process the sheer audacity of their plan, to perfectly execute my own. It's a big decision. They left shortly afterward, promising to call the next day to continue the conversation, their faces beaming with ill-concealed triumph, already picturing themselves ensconced in the mansion. Liam hung back momentarily as my parents headed to their car. "I'm sorry about all this," he murmured, surprising me, his gaze meeting mine for the first time. A flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes, a shared understanding. I didn't know. It's okay," I assured him, suddenly certain he was as much a pawn in their game as I had been, a victim of their manipulation, drawn into their toxic orbit. "Call me sometime without them. We should talk." After they left, Jessica turned to me with wide eyes, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "You're not actually considering letting them move in, are you, Em?" she asked, her voice incredulous. "Not a chance in hell," I replied, a cold resolve hardening in my voice, a quiet fury brewing. "But I need to understand what they're really after, beyond the obvious money grab. And I'm curious about this supposed brother." "They abandoned you when you were dying, Sarah," Jessica reminded me, her voice tight with anger on my behalf, a fierce loyalty in her eyes. "They don't deserve a minute of your time." She was right, of course. Rationally, logically, I knew she was. But something in me needed closure, needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal before I could truly move forward, truly be free. I needed to see their game play out, to understand every twisted layer of their deception, to ensure they could never hurt me again. The next morning, I called a private investigator recommended by Mr. Reed, a discreet professional with a reputation for thoroughness and an uncanny ability to dig up hidden truths. I gave him the name Liam Miller and what little information I had. Within a week, I had a preliminary report on Caleb Miller, my purported brother. He was indeed 25 years old, but he wasn't adopted. He was the son of my mother's cousin, a distant relative I'd never met. He had recently filed for bankruptcy after a failed restaurant venture and, as luck would have it for my parents' scheme, had moved in with them just 3 months earlier, right around the time the article about my inheritance broke. The pieces were falling into place, a grim picture emerging. Further investigation revealed the full, insidious depths of my parents' treachery. They had begun consulting with attorneys about contesting Grandma Beatrice's will shortly after the funeral, before I even knew the contents. Their ludicrous claim that I was mentally unstable and therefore unable to manage such significant assets. A direct attack on my competence and sanity, a continuation of their gaslighting. Their case had little legal merit, Mr. Reed had assured me, but they could potentially create expensive and stressful legal battles. A war of attrition designed to drain my resources and my spirit, to wear me down until I caved. As I suspected, Liam called me privately a few days after their visit, his voice hesitant, laced with shame, tinged with a desperate need to unburden himself. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Boston, far from prying eyes, a neutral ground. It was there, over lukewarm coffee, that he confessed the whole scheme, the carefully constructed web of lies. My parents had approached him after his bankruptcy, seeing his desperation, offering to help him financially, to bail him out of his desperate situation in exchange for participating in their elaborate plan. They had coached him on family details, rehearsed the backstory of his adoption, and promised him a significant share of the inheritance once they gained control. "I was desperate, Sarah," he admitted, shame evident in his downcast expression, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. "My life was a mess. They made it sound so simple, so logical, a way for everyone to benefit. But the more I learned about what they did to you, the worse I felt." He looked up, his eyes pleading for understanding. The final straw, he revealed, was overhearing them talk about having me declared incompetent, about putting me under their financial guardianship, gaining complete control over my life and my fortune. "They said they knew about your illness all along," Liam confessed, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization, a dawning horror in his own eyes. "But they decided not to help, because they thought your grandmother would leave everything to you if you died young. They were gambling on it. They were waiting for you to die." The calculated cruelty of it staggered me, leaving me breathless with a cold, terrifying rage. It was worse than I had imagined, a monstrous, calculated evil. They had known about my diagnosis, about the life-threatening illness that was consuming me, and they had deliberately chosen not to help. not to offer a single shred of support, gambling that my grandmother's fortune would eventually be theirs if I succumbed to my illness. It wasn't just neglect. It was a deliberate, monstrous calculation, a gamble with my life as the stake. The sheer depravity of it left me cold to the bone. Despite this horrifying revelation, I maintained the appearance of considering their proposal to move in. I played my part, feigning indecision, asking probing questions, allowing their greedy fantasy to grow. They visited frequently, their desperation growing with each passing day, becoming more transparent. My mother spent hours rearranging furniture, discussing renovation plans as though her residency was already assured, cataloging valuable items with poorly concealed avarice, making mental notes of what could be sold or repurposed. My father, ever the corporate climber, asked pointed questions about investment portfolios and property deeds, offering to help manage these complex matters, thinly veiled reconnaissance missions disguised as fatherly advice, trying to pry information from me. Liam, to his credit, continued to play his assigned role, enduring their manipulations while secretly providing me with critical information about my parents' plans, their increasingly desperate conversations, the mounting pressure they were under. Their desperation, he revealed, was growing. They had significant debts I hadn't known about, including a second mortgage on their modest Boston home and substantial credit card balances. Their carefully constructed facade of financial stability was crumbling. They needed my inheritance, not just for greed, but for sheer survival, and they were willing to do anything to get it. The day after learning the full extent of my parents' deception, I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Reed and a financial advisor he trusted implicitly, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Kennedy. I needed to understand my options, my protections, before proceeding with the final stage of my plan, to ensure every step was watertight. "They have no legal claim to your inheritance, Miss Reynolds," Mr. Reed assured me, his voice calm and authoritative, after I explained the situation, detailing Liam's confession. "Your grandmother's will is ironclad, and she included specific language disinheriting them, anticipating their actions, anticipating this very scenario." However, he continued, a slight frown creasing his brow, a note of caution in his voice, they could potentially file challenges that, while ultimately unsuccessful, would be costly and incredibly stressful to defend. They could drag this out for years, a war of attrition designed to exhaust you. "What about claims regarding my mental competence?" I asked, thinking of Liam's revelation, the horrifying idea of being declared unfit to manage my own life, of them controlling me. "They would need substantial evidence and medical testimony," he explained, shaking his head. "Given your improving health and clear cognitive function, such claims would be extremely difficult to substantiate. Still, legal battles are unpredictable and always unpleasant, especially when dealing with family when emotions run high." Ms. Kennedy, the financial advisor, outlined various options for protecting and potentially liquidating my assets. "The real estate can be sold relatively quickly in the current market, especially a premium property like this one," she stated, gesturing vaguely towards the window, beyond which the mansion stood, a valuable commodity. "The investment portfolios can be liquidated and transferred to offshore accounts if you're concerned about future legal entanglements, offering a layer of untraceability." I considered the options carefully. I had no particular attachment to the mansion beyond its connection to Grandma Beatrice, and those precious memories would remain regardless of ownership. The investments were simply numbers on paper, abstract figures. What I truly valued was the freedom the inheritance represented, freedom from financial worry, freedom to focus entirely on my health, and, most importantly, freedom from my toxic family, from their manipulative orbit, from the suffocating weight of their expectations. "I want to proceed with liquidation," I decided, my voice firm, a newfound clarity in my purpose, a cold steel in my resolve. "But discreetly. I need time to implement a larger plan." Over the next 2 months, I executed a carefully orchestrated strategy, moving with quiet precision, a silent game of chess, working closely with Mr. Reed and Ms. Kennedy, and a small, trusted team of professionals. I systematically sold Grandma Beatrice's properties and investments, converting them into less traceable assets. The mansion itself was sold to a real estate developer with a 30-day occupancy agreement, a crucial detail that allowed me to remain while finalizing other arrangements, giving me a perfect window of opportunity. I established new identity documents, not illegal, but utilizing my middle name and my grandmother's maiden name, creating a legal identity that would be difficult for my parents to trace. I set up secure accounts in countries with strong banking privacy laws and made arrangements for my continued medical treatment in a new, undisclosed location, a world away from Boston, a fresh start. Throughout this entire process, I meticulously maintained the facade of reconciliation with my parents. I allowed them to believe I was genuinely considering their proposal to move in together, feeding their greedy fantasy, watching them fall deeper into their trap. My mother spent hours in the mansion, helping redecorate rooms she would never inhabit, cataloging valuable items with poorly concealed avarice, her eyes constantly scanning for what she could claim. My father continued to offer his financial advice, thinly veiled reconnaissance missions designed to extract information about my holdings, asking about specific stocks and bonds. Liam, to his credit, continued to play his assigned role, enduring their manipulations, while secretly providing me with invaluable intelligence about my parents' plans, their growing desperation, their internal squabbles. Their debts, he confirmed, were significant. They needed my inheritance not just for greed, but for sheer survival, their carefully constructed world on the brink of collapse. 3 months after their initial reappearance, after Liam had confirmed their complete desperation and the advanced stage of their legal challenges against the will, I hosted a dinner party at the mansion. The guest list was small, intimate, carefully selected. My parents, Liam, Jessica, and me. The table was set with Grandma Beatrice's finest china and crystal, glimmering under the soft light of the chandelier. The meal was catered by one of Boston's premier restaurants. A final flourish of opulence before the curtain fell, a last taste of luxury they thought they would inherit. My father, Michael, raised his crystal glass, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, a flicker of triumph in their depths, smug satisfaction. "To family reunited," he proclaimed, his voice booming slightly in the elegant dining room, echoing off the high ceilings. "And to new beginnings in this beautiful home." He took a large gulp of the expensive wine. I smiled back, a cool, detached smile, clinked glasses, and sipped the expensive champagne, watching them over the rim. They had no idea that their new beginning was actually the final devastating chapter of their attempts to control my life, a bitter end to their long con, the grand finale of my escape. The dinner proceeded pleasantly enough, at least on the surface. My parents grew increasingly comfortable, making plans and suggestions as though their residency in the mansion was a foregone conclusion. My mother discussed potential renovations, the specific paint colors she preferred, how she'd reorganize the garden. My father outlined his retirement plans, speaking of golf courses and exotic vacations, seamlessly integrating themselves into a future that would never materialize. Jessica caught my eye occasionally, a silent acknowledgement of what was coming, a shared secret between us, but she maintained her composure admirably, a steadfast pillar of support. She was as ready as I was. As the evening wound down, as the last of the dessert plates were cleared, I excused myself briefly and returned with a sleek, black folder containing several documents. The weight of it in my hands felt like power, a culmination of months of quiet planning. "Before you leave," I said calmly, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil swirling within me, the cold satisfaction that was building. "I have something for each of you." I handed Liam an envelope first, his eyes widening in surprise as he took it, a flicker of apprehension. "This contains documentation of a trust fund I've established for you," I explained, my voice gentle, a stark contrast to the severity of what was to come. "It's not enormous, but it should help you get back on your feet and start over. The only condition is that you sever all ties with my parents, with Diana and Michael." His eyes met mine, then darted to his aunt and uncle, a flicker of understanding, then gratitude, passing between us, a silent acknowledgement of our shared understanding, of the liberation I was offering him. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, a silent acceptance. To my parents, I handed the folder, its contents a culmination of months of planning and quiet vengeance, the full extent of my meticulously executed plan. My mother, Diana, opened it eagerly, her face alight with expectation, a greedy gleam in her eyes, then froze as she scanned the contents, her expression slowly morphing into disbelief, then horror, My father, Michael, leaned over, his brow furrowed in confusion, his face shifting from puzzlement to an explosive, incandescent rage as he read alongside her, his eyes blazing. The folder contained a letter detailing, in stark, unflinching terms, my knowledge of their cruel abandonment during my illness, every call, every dismissal. It included bank statements showing the systematic liquidation of all assets, documentation of the mansion sale with the 30-day occupancy agreement, and a formal statement severing all contact with them, legally and emotionally. Every betrayal was laid bare, leaving no room for self-justification or denial, every lie exposed. You can't do this," my father sputtered, his face reddening, turning an angry purple, his composure cracking entirely, his perfect tie suddenly seeming askew. "This is our family home. This is a joke." "No," I corrected him calmly, my voice cutting through his bluster like a surgical knife, steady and clear. "It was Grandma Beatrice's home, then briefly, mine. Now it belongs to Beacon Hill Development Group. We all need to vacate within 27 days. I watched their faces fall, their world crumbling around them. "Where is the money?" my mother demanded, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Her voice rising to a shrill shriek, desperation clawing at her throat. "What have you done with it? It's ours." "It's somewhere you'll never find it," I replied, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering, meeting hers directly. "Just like I'll be somewhere you'll never find me." They exploded in predictable rage, threats and accusations, their carefully constructed personas crumbling into raw, ugly desperation. My mother's face twisted with fury, my father pounded his fist on the table. They called me ungrateful, selfish, a monster. I remained calm, having anticipated every argument, every emotional manipulation, every ugly word they might throw. When they threatened legal action, I simply pointed out that litigation is expensive, and they were already financially overextended, their house of cards collapsing around them, their debts revealed. When they attempted emotional manipulation, invoking family and blood, I reminded them of their choice to abandon me when I needed them most, when my life hung in the balance, when they gambled on my death. "You can leave now," I said finally, standing to signal the unequivocal end of the evening, my voice a quiet command. "Or I can call the police and have you removed. Either way, this is the last time we'll see each other. This is goodbye." They left in a storm of threats and recriminations, their angry voices echoing down the long driveway, curses trailing behind them. Liam followed quietly behind, but before he disappeared into the night, he turned and gave me a subtle nod of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the justice that had been served, of the truth finally setting him free too. After they were gone, Jessica hugged me tightly, her arms a comforting embrace, her quiet strength a solid presence. "Are you okay, Sarah?" she whispered, her voice filled with concern. "Better than I've been in years," I replied honestly, a profound sense of relief washing over me, a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in forever. And it was true. The oppressive weight of their toxic presence, their endless expectations and judgments, had finally lifted. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. Free to live, free to breathe, free to be myself. The next morning, I was gone, leaving no forwarding address, no trace for them to follow, disappearing like a wisp of smoke. Only Jessica knew my destination, swearing to keep my secret safe. From a safe distance, I watched through updates from Mr. Reed as my parents were forced to leave the mansion when the occupancy period ended. Their desperate attempts to contest the will or claim fraud going nowhere without funds to pay attorneys. The financial house of cards they had built collapsed around them, forcing them to downsize dramatically and face the harsh consequences of their choices. Their carefully curated lives unraveled publicly. I had one. Not just survival against a deadly disease, but freedom from the people who had never truly loved me as I deserved to be loved. Freedom from a lifetime of emotional neglect and manipulation. The coastal town I chose for my new life couldn't be more different from Boston's urban sophistication. Here, small, colorful houses line quiet streets that lead to pristine, windswept beaches. The air is cleaner, salty, carrying the scent of the ocean, a constant reminder of the vastness and freedom of the world. The pace is slower, unhurried, the people friendlier, their faces open and kind. Without the competitive edge I was so used to. No one here knows me as an heiress or a survivor of profound betrayal or a cancer patient. I'm just Ellie Gray, the quiet woman who opened the small, charming bookstore on Main Street. It's a simple life, and it's mine. My transformation wasn't just geographical. I changed my appearance too. A softer hairstyle, colored contacts that shifted the hue of my eyes, a wardrobe that reflected my new, more relaxed lifestyle, comfortable fabrics instead of rigid power suits. Not elaborate disguises exactly, but enough subtle alterations that casual observers from my past life wouldn't easily recognize me. It was less about hiding and more about shedding the old skin, embracing a new identity that felt authentic. The letter I left for my parents, delivered by Mr. Reed after my departure, was comprehensive and unflinching. I had detailed every moment of their abandonment during my illness, every cruel word and broken promise, every instance of their calculated indifference. I included medical records documenting my fight for survival without their support, alongside financial statements showing all assets had been liquidated and transferred beyond their reach. I also left irrefutable evidence of their plan to have me declared incompetent, statements from Liam about his recruitment into their scheme, and copies of their secret consultations with attorneys about contesting the will. Every betrayal was laid bare, exposed for what it was, leaving no room for self-justification or denial. The final paragraph was both closure and liberation. I release you from any obligation to be my parents, as you released yourself from that role when you chose your comfort over my life. I neither hate you nor forgive you. I simply choose to exist in a world where you have no power to hurt me anymore. My life is mine now. Through carefully structured legal arrangements, I ensured they could not successfully challenge my decisions. The assets were protected, the transactions legitimate if unorthodox. They were left with nothing but the chilling knowledge of what they had thrown away. Not just a fortune, but a daughter who would have loved them if only they had let her, if only they had chosen love over greed. Jessica remains my closest connection to the past, visiting several times a year, bringing me up to date on necessary information, sharing news of the world I left behind. She told me about my parents' forced move from the Beacon Hill mansion, their desperate, pathetic attempts to maintain appearances despite their financial ruin, their eventual relocation to a modest apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood, their social standing utterly destroyed. She also told me about Liam, who surprised us both by accepting the trust fund and using it wisely. He enrolled in culinary school, pursuing his true passion for cooking, which financial pressures had derailed years ago. He occasionally sends messages through Jessica, updates on his progress, and expressions of gratitude. He has become, ironically, more of a family to me than my biological parents ever were. He chose to break free, just like I did. My new life revolves around simple pleasures and meaningful work. The bookstore, the Coastal Read, provides sufficient cover for my income while allowing me to create a community space I'm genuinely proud of. I host reading groups, writing workshops, and children's story hours, my voice gaining confidence with each session, finding joy in shared stories. The store has become a neighborhood fixture, a place of warmth and connection, and I've found friends here who value me for who I am, for my kindness and my quiet strength, not for what I possess or how I appear. My health continues to improve. I traveled discreetly to a specialized medical center several hours away for maintenance treatments, but the disease remains firmly in remission. Each clean scan feels like another victory, another year of life reclaimed from the shadows of illness, a profound gratitude swelling in my chest. A significant portion of my inheritance now goes to medical research for rare blood disorders, and to a foundation I established anonymously, dedicated to helping patients access experimental treatments their insurance won't cover. Every quarter, the foundation selects several recipients who receive full funding for treatments that might save their lives, offering them the chance I almost didn't get, a chance to fight, a chance to live. Sometimes I think about Grandma Beatrice, wondering if she would approve of my choices. I believe she would. Her journals revealed a woman who valued authenticity and self-determination above social conventions, above appearances, above all else. She had the courage to define family by love rather than blood, to recognize toxic relationships, and to set firm boundaries against them. In my own way, I've done the same. I've honored her legacy, not just with her money, but with my life. Occasionally, I catch myself scanning the faces of tourists in town, a lingering habit, half expecting to see my parents. But Jessica assures me they've given up the search, convinced by their attorneys that the money is irretrievably gone and any further pursuit is futile. They've moved on to other potential sources of financial rescue, their patterns unchanged despite everything that has transpired, forever chasing the next illusion of wealth. Liam visits sometimes now, graduated and working as a sous chef at a respected restaurant nearby. We've developed a cautious, genuine friendship, both of us healing from different but related wounds inflicted by the same people. "We're the family they couldn't appreciate," he said during his last visit, a wry smile on his face, a quiet understanding passing between us. Their loss. I've come to understand that family isn't defined by genetics or legal documents. It's built through choice, through consistency, through mutual respect and unconditional love. Jessica is family. Liam is becoming family. The community I've built around my bookstore holds elements of family, and Grandma Beatrice will always be family. Her wisdom continuing to guide me long after her physical presence is gone, a guiding star. The journey from who I was to who I am has been painful beyond description, yet strangely necessary. I would never have found this strength, this clarity, this profound peace, without facing the darkest moments of abandonment and betrayal from those who should have been my closest kin. From those experiences came the courage to define my own worth, to set boundaries that protect my spirit, to build a life aligned with my true values rather than others' expectations. Every evening, I walk along the beach as the sun sets over the water, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink. The salty air cleanses me, the rhythm of the waves soothes my soul. Sometimes I think about the parallel life I might have lived, dying slowly in that tiny apartment, forgotten and alone, or worse, surviving but trapped forever in my parents' manipulative orbit, forever seeking approval that would never come. The contrast with my current reality is stark and profoundly affirming. I don't know what the future holds. Perhaps someday I'll share my story with someone special, open my heart to deeper connection without fear of betrayal. Perhaps I'll expand the bookstore, or start another business, or turn my experience into a novel, with the names changed to protect both the innocent and the guilty. What matters is that these choices are mine alone, unfettered by others' demands or expectations, driven only by my own truth. If there's a lesson in my story, perhaps it's this. Sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's the ultimate act of self-preservation. Sometimes the family you were born into isn't the family you deserve. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to build a life centered on your own well-being rather than others' approval. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family relationships to save yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that choosing your own well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through adversity. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage on yours.